Hi and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Focus. Thanks for coming back to watch again. This is episode 4 now, the second one where it's just me. If this has any value, please do post a comment, like and subscribe so you get all the future episodes. I'm going to try and find something new every week to talk about. This week we'll be talking about the drawer coming unclipped from the bolt. We're all familiar with back clipping, I'm sure we are. If not, we're going to talk about that in a future episode. But today we're talking about how the quick draw can come unclipped from a bolt. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. It's actually the topic of the Alpine Club's current edition of the prescription. So in November 2024, they published a report of a person having an accident because their drawer unclipped. So we're going to start by looking at that. The accident happened in March of 2023. It was at Pilot Mountain State Park on a climb called Goodness Gracious, which was a 10A sport route. I've edited a little bit for clarity as well, so you can read the full report over at the Alpine Club's website. As always, this isn't to judge the climbers. This is so we can learn from what happened to hopefully allow us to not make the same mistake. So in their own words, mostly, my climbing partner and I have 10 and 6 years of climbing experience respectively. We incorrectly identified the route as a 5-7. The route was 510A, but within the climber's ability. The crux involved throwing a heel hook and mantling onto an awkward bulge. I got partially over the bulge but couldn't find a good handhold. I ended up falling off. Instead of stopping, I hit the ground after 20 feet. Both feet landed on a flat rock step on the main hiking trail. My belayer took up enough slack so that the rope stretched to catch right as my feet hit. I realized that the Alpine quick draw that I had clipped into the third bolt was still clipped to the rope. Somehow, as I was wrestling with the move, it had come unclipped on the hanger. I was wearing a helmet, but fortunately, I did not hit my head or back during the fall. The rescue from the crag took about 2 hours, which is surprisingly quick. You can expect any accident that happens anywhere but roadside that involves a carry out of the casualty to take several hours. So you should always be ready for that if it happens. I think the first takeaway is how the belayer was attentive to what was happening and was able to take in enough slack to prevent the climber from hitting the ground. And you think how close they were. Their heels hit the ground, hit the step at the climbing trail, but they didn't hit the ground. So not very far at all. Now, I've been dropped climbing before and I ended up with my butt about 6 inches above the ground and my hand was on the ground when I stopped. So I do understand what it feels like to fall further than you expect and get stopped in the nick of time. Like for me, it was this distance between a catch and a wheelchair, possibly. So full marks, well played, belayer. In that situation, they were experienced. They had maybe 6 years of climbing, which is a long time if you climb regularly. I always worry about like when people say, I've been climbing for 2 years, I've been climbing for 6 years, whatever it is, like you can say you were climbing for 30 years, but you've only climbed 4 times. But if you're going to climb for 10 years and you climb a lot, or even 6 months and you suddenly get the bug and you climb every weekend and you climb with experienced climbers who are really good and you're a sponge for information and with people who are willing to mentor and teach, you may know more than someone who's been climbing for 20 years. So when someone says, I've been climbing 10 years, I've been climbing 6 years, you need to be careful. I was recently yanked off a wall in a climbing gym by someone who told me they'd been lead belaying for 2 years. It turned out that they were exaggerating a lot. You can read that report over on climbingfocus.com. I had a little write-up. The article is called, Do You Suck at Belaying? So maybe you can answer that question honestly to yourself and find out if you need to maybe ask a friend or take a class. If these climbers were very experienced, it's worth noting that experienced climbers make mistakes. I think complacency is a large part in climbing accidents. And for an experienced climber to have an accident, it's very, very common, unfortunately. We get very complacent as we get more comfortable. There was also a mistake made, which the climber acknowledges fully, that they intended to climb a 7 and ended up climbing a 10A. They also said that they had climbed 11s in the area, so a climb of 10A wasn't that far out of their comfort zone. So I looked up these climbs on Mountain Project, and the 5-7s, there's 2 5-7s and a 5-6 in the area, they look nothing like the climb. So the other thing that might be a contributing factor was the climb was new. It was put in, I think, in 2022. That's certainly where Mountain Project has it listed as a new climb. There's mention in the area that there's new climbs with dirty rocks, with dirt on them and rocks that need to be cleared. So it's possible that this was a newish climb that maybe wasn't in a guidebook if they were looking at it. So sometimes you count 4 climbs across from the climb that you can clearly identify, and 4 climbs across, you're like, this must be it, and on you go. And if you look at the climbs on Mountain Project, for this one and the one next to it. Again, this one is called Goodness Gracious 10A at Pilot Mountain State Park. So if you look at those climbs, you'll see they look nothing like each other. So it's funny to me how we can convince ourselves that we're in the right place doing the right climb. I'm never going to judge someone for climbing the wrong climb. I've done it twice. My first ever trad lead turned out to be a 10A. And I had never placed any gear in my life at that point, and it was almost the last thing I did. I also climbed another route in South Wales, just outside of a little town called Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales, where there's a quarry and a lot of diagonal crags. And I went up what I thought was an E1, but it turned out to be an E3. And I ended up taking a big fall, a big whip going all the way back, again, a trad route. And the rope hit me in the face and ended up burning my face. So I'm not quite sure how I managed that. I probably had the rope behind my leg and went off in a bad way in a completely uncontrolled fall, and just everything went wrong. I was a very, very inexperienced climber when I made both of those mistakes. But it doesn't mean that just because I'm experienced now, I wouldn't make a similar mistake. So I have to stay aware that this is a possibility. And if I'm aware, I'm less likely to make that mistake. The climber also mentioned they were climbing over a bulge. So you can see the crux seems to be an overhang that comes up. So it goes up and then there's an overhang. And then just as they climb around the overhang, that's kind of the crux move there. So as you climb up, if you're reaching around a bulge and clipping and then climbing over that bulge is going to move down you as you climb past. And as it gets to that bulge, as your belly gets to that bulge and you pull in and you get kind of close, it's possible to dislodge that drawer and pull it up into an odd place. I one time had a climb in Shelf Road, and as I climbed up, my Quickdraw clipped back onto my harness, and all of a sudden I was completely locked. Unfortunately, I was like half wedged in a chimney and not close enough to reach anything else, and it was very difficult. It had clipped onto my gear loop at the back as I moved up, and I was completely stuck. Fortunately, I didn't fall. I was able to work it out, but I couldn't reach where the harness had clipped because I was kind of half in this chimney. So stuff happens. You never can quite be sure what's going on. It's always a great idea to be checking what's going on, but stuff still happens. Like certainly as you move past an area and you're focusing on the climbing and not perhaps on where the drawers are being positioned. So a large contributing factor to this climb was probably how the carabiner was clipped to the drawer. So I'm going to do a demonstration for you at the end of the video. We'll get the drawers out and stand up, and I'll show you how to clip in a way that is safer and a way to clip that is unsafe. Again, we're all very aware of the back clip, but we're perhaps not as aware of how an inverted carabiner can unclip itself. It doesn't happen as much, but it is something that we should talk about. And it's something that belay tests and lead tests at gyms should talk about as well. They typically don't, because climbing gyms use usually a quick link onto the bolt, and so it's not going to happen at a gym. But for a lot of people, that lead test that they take in the gym is the only lead training they take into climbing outside at areas that are noted as good for beginner climbers or good for climbers transitioning from indoor to outdoors. And there's a huge shift in that you are now clipping a bolt and not just only clipping the hanger. And because more climbers are transitioning from indoors to outdoors, and lead tests in gyms are missing out on an important piece of information, there is a possibility that this kind of accident could be on the rise. So on the first incident, the climber fell because the drawer became unclipped from a hanger, so a bolt and a hanger, possibly being clipped incorrectly, leading to the carabiner rotating to the point where the gate was pushed open and the carabiner unclipped itself. We'll look to see how that's possible with a little demo at the end of the video, so stick around for that. While you're waiting, you could like or subscribe. That would be really appreciated. So let's move on to incident 2. This second one involves a different type of hanger. It was a glue-in, so there's just a circle of metal for you to clip to. No hanger, no bolt. It's a very popular type of bolt because it's cheaper, it's easy to put in, and just uses epoxy and a bolt and a hole, and you're starting to equip your routes. So we're going to look at how that happens again. We'll do that up on the board at the end of the video. So we'll look at the 2 different methods that you can detach a carabiner while you're lead climbing unintentionally. Scary stuff. So let me read again what happened. The climber fell from the mantle move just below the chains. His top Quickdraw came unclipped from the rock. When he came to rest, it was on his rope, undamaged. It was not backclipped. Again, we'll talk about what backclipping is another time. The bolt did not break or pull out. He had backcleaned the drawer below it. Backcleaning is the process of removing a drawer that you've already set and has protected you and is no longer the primary bolt that will catch you if you fall. there will be a higher one. So you put the first one, clip, second one, clip, third one, clip. You might be able to reach down or down climb to the second one or even the first one and unclip it and clip it back on. This happens quite often in trad climbing where you might want to save a piece of equipment that you know you'll need later on. You put a bomber piece in, you go back, you take out the other piece. On sport climbing, it would typically only be done if the rope was zigzagging around so much that there was so much friction that you'd want to detach a line and reduce the zigzagging and therefore reduce the friction. That was the case in this climb. He had back cleaned the drawer below it, the only one on the slabby ramp leading to the final overhang. This meant that when the top drawer unclipped, he took a 50 to 60 foot fall, ending up below the first bolt of the climb. He sustained a serious injury to his hand and arm during the fall. So some things to note: the drawer was hung by the previous climber climbing the route. Both climbers had taken multiple falls and the drawer hadn't unclipped. It's believed the gate was facing to the left and the climb went straight up to the mantle to the finish. One of the takeaways from this is looking at the climb in 3 dimensions. We will often look at zigzagging that runs from left to right as it goes up the climb. So we have our X and Y dimensions, but we're in a 3-dimensional environment. There's another axis, the Z axis, that comes in. So as you climb in and up over things, the rope is going to have an increase in friction, not just to the left and right. So when we're on the ground doing our pre-climb assessment of where any dangerous areas are on the climb, then we need to look to see, does the rope not just zigzag left and right, and that's where I need to reduce friction, but does the rope zigzag in and out as well? And a combination of both could increase the friction a lot. So this is where you can extend a climb using a sling or a longer quick draw to be able to reduce that coefficient of friction. I don't know if there was any effect of having a different climber set the route for them and pre-place the drawers, but it's possible that the gate may have been facing the wrong way from where they might have chosen to make those same moves. We all climb routes differently, so I might climb up to the right of a bolt, where someone else might climb up slightly to the left. And again, that may draw the gate up in a way that they weren't intending. This climb is also pretty run out between bolts. Fairly old school bolting. Back in the day, they didn't always place a lot of bolts. Certainly not if there was supplemental gear to be found. They would only place the bolts on the areas that were necessary, and you were expected to bring gear. Those climbs typically are listed as trad on Mountain Project, but if something was listed as sport, but the bolting was PG-13, let's say, for other people to follow that route, it might be worth considering keeping a little bit of trad gear and learning how to use that. I personally almost always bring my tri-cams when I go. Tri-cams are very versatile. They work like cams, they work like nuts. They have multiple placements in different orientations to cover a lot of width in different areas. I also have a set of micro nuts that I like to use that are very small, and I just throw this in the bag, and just on the off chance when I'm looking from the ground, if I see a run out but a possible place to place a possible spot to place some gear, I'm probably going to throw a tri-cam in there as well or something. So before we get to the board, I just want to say this is a very rare occurrence. It doesn't happen very often, but there's 2 examples. I found 2 other comments on Mountain Project. One of them was on the Red Sea of Holes in Colorado. Second bolt in this example was the furthest away from the current direction of travel. And even though it was slung with a long draw, the sling was still pulled upward and inverted. And when the climber fell, the third bolt sheared off. It was an old hammer drive-in. We always assume bolts are super safe, but on these old climbs, particularly on the South Platte in Colorado, there's a lot of very old climbs that are put there with old, terrible bolts. Well, the third one broke. So when they fell, the second one was the one that took all the load. And as it did, it unclipped itself, leaving just the first bolt, which was way too low, and the climber hit the ground. They were okay. They were the one making their own comments, so they did survive from that one. They escaped with non-life-threatening injuries. They still feel it in their wrist, and I can relate to that. I took a fall when I was very young, free soloing up to the anchors on what I thought was the easy side of a column of rock at Harrison's Rocks in Tunbridge Wells. I got to the top. It was very slimy. I slipped. I fell. And I landed so hard that 30 plus years later, I still feel that in my knee when I go hiking. So yeah, I feel his pain. So another person on Mountain Project posted, this happened to me while climbing lead, reached the anchors, set myself up for cleaning the route, started lowering, and the last quick draw between the anchor had disappeared. I found it still clipped to the rope, hanging on top of the next quick draw. Sometimes as you climb above the quick draw, the rope drags it along upwards and makes the bolt carabiner do some weird stuff. Absolutely. This is not normal behavior. This isn't the kind of thing we see on 99% of the climbs we're going to do. But we only need to fall once badly. And if we fall bad enough, we're going to get hurt. So why don't we jump up and have a look at how these things unclip themselves. Okay, so the first thing to notice, this is a quick draw. It is made of 2 quick link carabiners with no locking on them and a dog bone in between that's supposed to look like a dog bone with a narrow bit and 2 wide bits either end. So one end of the dog bone has a rubber grommet that helps secure it and so it doesn't flop around as much. This is really useful when you're clipping the rope. As you come up, if it's not flopping around, then you can clip it a lot easier than when it flops around. The other end is loose. You can see up on this end, the carabiner will flop around a lot. This is to allow this dog bone to move with a little more freedom and therefore allow the rope to move without it affecting this top carabiner. So when you clip one of these, there's a tight end and a loose end, you always clip the loose end to the bolt. So another interesting thing that's supposed to help the rope stay in the drawer is I have a wire on one end and I have a solid on the other. The reason I was always told for this is to reduce the inertia of the gate, and you can hear this when I bang it on the back of my hands. If I bang the spine, that clicking sound that you're hearing is the gate opening and snapping closed like that. If you do the same thing with the wire gate, no snapping sound. There's not enough inertia in the gate. It also feels like that spring is perhaps a little bit stronger as well. But the idea is that should the drawer slap against the rock, the gate can't momentarily pop open, causing, as the load comes on, causing either the rope to find a way out or to have the carabiner break because it's not being secured anymore. So it doesn't need a wire on the top typically for that reason. One of the other nice advantages of the wire as well is it creates a flat spot. So when you go to clip, the rope will sit flat and won't tend to rock around as much and makes that clip just a little bit easier. So what happens when we clip? If you come in and clip from this side, notice that the angle of the bolt is from the top left to the bottom right. And as I clip it, it comes in here. And then when I go to unclip, or as I climb up to the left, as I come up like this, now the gate is hitting on this drawer. And as you climb up, I'm just going to help it do it. It goes up like this, and then you fall, and it comes off. It's not ideal. So one of the cures for this is to clip in on the underside. So not on the top, which feels very natural to clip it that way, but to clip in from the underside. And that way, as you climb up, it can't happen. Now the spine of the carabiner hits on this side. If it goes up on the other side, as this comes up, it's less light. You would have to go all the way up and around and then fall to the left. And fall over to the left for this drawer to open. And then it would fall off. So another fix that we have, which is really easy, is just to take this carabiner and flip it. Now, I understand that some climbs are so difficult that you just can't have the extra to do that. In which case you might want to consider getting a particular carabiner that has a very easy locking mechanism that helps keep it in place. The Edelrid Pure Slide is one such carabiner. It has a very small locking mechanism. It does protrude a little bit, so it's possible the rope could rub on that perhaps, or it could hit the gate and push itself back. So it's not perfect, but it will add a little bit of locking security to the quick draw that you're attaching to the bolt. But when you flip that upside down, just like that, now the back of the gate is hitting on this side. And again, if you're climbing to the right, as the climb progresses, it goes that way, the gate doesn't reach the back. It could theoretically still kind of get over there and put some really weird loads on there, and then this, this more likely would fall off on this part. But if we keep in mind that we're climbing to the right or the left of the bolt after we've clipped it, that shouldn't happen. So the second example wasn't a hanger like this with a bolt. It was a regular Eyebolt or glue-in type bolt. So here I have an Eyebolt just screwed in. This is not a climbing Eyebolt, this is just a regular Eyebolt. This is just so I can practice clipping from various sides down low, as well as clipping up high. But if the climber's put in like this, the climber goes up, and then the drawer kind of settles back into a position there, it's possible then for the drawer to come off and fall off. So it's good to be aware of what can happen with this type of glue-in bolt or a hanger. So when you clip it, you need to be aware enough that if you clip that and again, flip that drawer around, and that isn't likely to happen as you climb up. Even if it was able to get in here, again, you would have to climb off from the direction that you intended to climb all the way over here for that to be able to come off. So you'd have to start up to the left and then go to the right. The safest solution is to use one of these. This is a locker. On this one, it has a locker on both ends. You could make a dog bone and just replace one of the carabiners on the loose end with a locker if you wanted to. One of the complaints I saw online was like, if climbs are really hard, who has the time to be messing with placing one of these? Now, when the drawers are set open, before you climb, you'd want to make sure that they're not done open so tight that you can't easily do them up. So they should be finger tight, but you could bring it up till it's almost locking. So it sits back a whole 3 turns or 3 twists. Now it's locking, I can bring it back and I can have it just to the point where it's unlocking. Now to get it to lock and stay on is a single twist. So if I now come in and I clip in the wrong direction as I come off, I can just hit that with my thumb a couple of times and it's not done up properly. But just those couple of twists are going to help lock it. So even on really hard climbs, you could save yourself a ground fall by using one of these where it's going to be a little bit difficult for the next move. So one last consideration when you're clipping in. If we are expecting to clip in from the underside of the hanger, not the top side, but the lower side. So generally we're taught to climb across the spine of the carabiner when we leave that bolt. So if the climb tends to the right, we want to make sure that the back of the carabiner is to the right. So the flipping solution helps us. Let's say this climb is going off to the left. I can clip in from above as long as I remember to flip the carabiner. And then I can continue to clip this rope on the left-hand side and continue up the climb to the left. But if I clip in from the underside and it goes to the left, the rope is going to run across the gate. We want to avoid that if we can. So one of the solutions, like I say, is to flip that carabiner. The other solution is if you have 2 sets of quick draws, like I do, you can rack them differently. So I know if I'm clipping and I'm going to the left, I use one of my golds. And if I'm clipping and going to the right, I can use a pink. Remember, this scenario requires friction on the rope to be able to pull it into these odd positions. It's not likely if you're just climbing straight through and climbing up that the rope is going to give you any difficulty. This rope is just going to continue up and not get pulled into funny places. Most sport climbers should keep a couple of alpine drawers or a couple of slings on them while they're climbing, just to help relieve friction on any routes that have drawers that are anything but like perfectly straight up. So an alpine drawer can be extended just like that. And that way, if the climb is moving off to the left and right, it reduces any possible pulling of this carabiner as you climb. They're generally more floppy, so on the second accident they did use an alpine quick draw, but I'm not sure that contributed in any significant way. If anything, a dog bone is stiffer and therefore more likely to move around as friction hits the rope. Another alternative is to use a sling. So I have a sling with a carabiner. This is a 120 meter sling. That's a big sling. This is a 120 centimeter sling. You can shorten a sling by tying a simple overhand knot straight in there. Dress it, make it look neat, and it's just a straight up overhand knot. And that way you now can clip into the system in here, and you're inside the sling and you're above the knot, and that's going to reduce the length. So you can make it custom length if you wanted to as well. You can carry your slings in 2 different ways. You can just double them over, put them over your head, and make sure that if you do carry them over your shoulder, you put one arm through. Never carry a sling over your neck like this, because it will not end well if you do fall. So by putting it over here, if something went wrong, it would still catch on your armpit and not on your neck. And then the carabiner can be racked on here as well, and it's just going to sit down and out of the way like this. If you wear multiple slings, make sure they all sit the same way. If you start putting them across, you won't be able to grab a different length sling or a different sling. You can only grab the one on top. So make sure they all sit the same way. And remember, of course, if you put a jacket on or a backpack, these should be above the backpack and above the jacket. The backpack is a really easy mistake to make. So the other way to rack a sling, you take the sling, you put one twist and bring the ends together, and that creates 2 loops. You clip your carabiner and then twist until it's pretty tight. And then as you bring the 2 ends together, it's going to wrap itself up. So the takeaways: if the bolt angle is like this, you clip in from the underside of the bolt, not the top. If you have to clip into the top to protect the direction of your carabiner so the rope runs over the spine, then make sure you flip the carabiner at the top upside down. If you remember to do that, these accidents that we've talked about today are very unlikely to happen to you. Also use a locker. Bring a locker with you if you have one. Bring a sling with you so you can extend any points where you think the friction may occur. And do an assessment of the climb from the ground so you don't run into unexpected difficulties that you should have been able to spot. Any directional changes of the climb, any in to out directional changes of the climb may require methods to reduce friction. And of course, back cleaning, it's not something that you should perhaps consider as part of your regular climbing routine, particularly if there's nothing else between that backup bolt and the ground. So thank you for listening again. Please do like and subscribe. I'm hoping to put one of these episodes out every couple of weeks. And if it's been useful, hit that like button, let other people help learn this. This should be something we all know. Certainly a simple thing like flipping a carabiner around in a bolt should be something that everybody is aware of, and should be something we're passing on to our friends if they're not. And please let me know how I'm doing. I got my first comment last week and I was very happy to hear some feedback from somebody. So please do keep commenting on the videos. I find that really useful and valuable to hopefully produce the kind of content you want and the kind of content that's valuable to the community at large. So thanks very much. My name again is Fiona. You can see a couple of the videos that I've posted already on @versus_gravity on YouTube. So if you search for Fiona versus Gravity, you should be able to find me on there as well. I have a bad habit. That last video I did, I was playing around with these things in my hands the whole damn time. And I just did it again. I need to put them down. So yeah, have a look at the description below, and I'll link to Climbing Focus where you'll find the previous episodes. All right, well, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like it, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.